Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, folks, wherever you may be in this wonderful world of ours. Just about to kick off the webinar and just waiting for a few stragglers to flow through. We've got quite a disparity in terms of where people are located, actually, which is quite impressive. So looking at all this sort of stuff, we're going to have a great time today. Gentleman on my right, your left, whichever way you're looking at the screen, is my colleague Adam Prentice, who is one of the financial planners here. And we look forward to just giving you guys a bit of an insight into life in the UAE for those who are looking at moving here, and also too for those who are already here or just recently arrived and still getting their feet on the ground. So we'll just wait a couple more minutes longer. I'm just going to share my screen while we're waiting for those stragglers to come through. Rightio, guys, let's get this show on the road. I've got a good cohort of people here, which is fantastic. So today we're going to be talking about moving to the UAE, what every Australian expat should know. And we're talking, I guess, with authority because Adam and myself and many others have actually gone through this process. So the only difference is we're going to put a bit of a financial lens on it as well, but also talk about other key issues as well too that expats face from time to time. No presentation would be, I guess, replete without having a disclaimer. Obviously, as a dual regulated financial advisory firm, we've got a bit of information here to run through with folks. And just to give you guys the short version of this, all the information we're going to talk about today should be treated as educational and informational advice and general advice. Please do not construe this as personal advice. As a licensed firm in the UAE, we're actually proud to say we're the only Australian firm in not only the UAE, but the whole of the GCC region that is regulated in the region to provide financial advice. So who is the Atlas Wealth Group? We're the leading provider of Australian expat financial advice, tax, mortgage and asset management services. We're regulated by ASIC, the ATO and the DFSA, so lots of acronyms there. We've got clients in over 50 countries and proud to work with some awesome people in some awesome locations. We manage, actually that number's a bit old there, so we manage over $425 million in assets for clients around the world. And all of our specialists are degree qualified with obviously numerous postgraduate certifications, which makes us incredibly unique, especially in the Middle East here, where there's a lot of people running around pretending to be advisors who not only don't have the proper licensing, but they don't even have the qualifications to call themselves that. So Atlas in Dubai, as I said before, we're the only Australian financial services firm in the region that is dual licensed both in Australia and the UAE. That's a very important part for clients to, and people on the call to understand. There's a lot of folks here in the region who will be happy to take your money. And for them, it's more of a transaction, whereas for us, as an Australian firm working with Australian clients, we're very close to our community. All of the team in the office are Australian, and we're what's called a fiduciary firm, which means we only operate on a fee-for-service basis and we don't receive any commissions. So today's agenda, we're going to run through, actually there's been a bit of a flip around here. So first of all, we're going to set up setting up financially in the UAE, and I'll talk about that. And then we'll hand over to Adam, who will talk about the tax status and superannuation investments and property. And then I'll flick back to myself, where we talk about Dubai versus Abu Dhabi, family logistics and cultural tips and tricks. So let's get the show on the road. At the end, we are going to be running a Q&A section. So as we're talking, if you do have any questions that you'd like to ask, please put them in the chat function and we'll go through those and answer those accordingly. So setting up in the UAE. This is a different process. You know, obviously living and growing up in Australia, if that's your background, you'd be probably spoilt with choice and ease when it comes to setting up. You're obviously born into that country or you've emigrated to that country, so you have right of abode. Here it's a bit different, and today we'll go through and explain the steps as we go through that process of setting up your life here in the UAE. So first thing first, you need to obtain the right of abode. Australians are very fortunate that we're able to come in on a 30-day, and actually no, I think it's 90-day visa now, isn't it? So you don't need to apply for any visas in advance. It's visa on arrival. However, if you are coming intending to work, you do need to have a work visa. You can't work on a visit or a tourist visa. Just be careful. There's a lot of sharks out there who are trying to get people to work on tourist visas. That's a big no-no, and you will be in trouble. So once you've accepted a job offer from your employer, you need to apply. They will apply for a residency visa on your behalf. This can be either done while you're overseas or after you arrive in the country. You arrive in the country on a tourist visa, the 90-day tourist visa, and then your employer will get to work with their PRO in establishing that work visa. You'll also need to take a medical fitness test at a government-approved health centre. Nothing major. They take a quick blood test, takes about 20 seconds, and they also do an X-ray of your chest to screen for any tuberculosis as well. After you've received that work visa and passed the medical test, then you'll be granted an Emirates ID card. And that's when you can start to solidify your presence here in the UAE. Unlike Australia, we do have a card here that is probably the center of your universe. Everything dovetails off that card. So it's you can't really do anything before getting that card. So once you've got the EID, then you can start approaching local service providers and start setting up your financial and physical life in the UAE. So without the EID, you can't really get any bank accounts, phone plans, you can't sign leases. So it's important to get that done as soon as possible because then you can start to actually, as I said, have a bank account in the UAE, have a local phone number, and also to sign up to a rental lease. Everything is linked to your EID, which makes life very simple from a renewal perspective. You know, my Emirates ID expired last month and it's all digitally connected. So I was renewing it for my phone plan provider. I gave them authority to access a government app and then the information came through automatically with that renewal. So one thing the UAE does very well is that digital integration part. So the good news is that's great. It's just got to get through that whole work visa, and once you've got that done, it's great. Most companies are pretty good these days, and the turnaround times are pretty quick as well too. Key important point: yes, there are no personal income taxes in the UAE, but, and that's always the big thing I like to impress on a lot of folks, we do pay a lot of other fees, which you would not have been used to while living in Australia. So in Australia, you pay your tax and that it gives you certain things like Medicare and all those other bits and pieces. Over here, it's a bit of a user pay system. So when you are paying for things, you'll see extra little charges appearing on transactions. The famous ones are the knowledge and innovation fees. Not sure what extra knowledge or innovation I've received out of that, but you'll see these little charges of 30 and 40 and 50 dirhams sort of popping up on those invoices. Municipality fees, that's a big one. This is when you take out a rental lease, you will pay a 5% fee based on the amount of rent that you pay, and that'll be charged as part of your utility bill every month. And the last one, and this was one thing that caught me out by surprise in a great way, was actually paying rental commission fees. So when you go to rent a place, you'll go through an agent. They'll show you a place. You say, great, I'll take it. You actually pay the agent 5% in fees. So what that means is, in Australia, it'd probably be the other way around. But over here, the agent, the tenant pays the fees. So big thing to sort of watch out there when it comes to planning out your cash flows with an arrival into the country. Rightio, I'm going to hand you over to Adam now, and he's going to run through all the details on tax status.
Brett, if you just want to mute, I think there was a bit of a complaint around the echo, but yeah, on those fees, I'm pretty sure I've had 2 of 3 of them in the last week. One was rent, and then a knowledge and innovation fee for a speeding fine. So I'm not really sure what that is for, but yeah, it's just what it is over here. But tax status. So once you're over here, obviously there's a bit of cleanup to be done back in Australia. So becoming a non-resident for tax purposes complicates things a bit. So rules for income, investments, capital gains tax, they all change, and depending on what type of asset it is. So I will be taking you through that today. And she'll be all right is not an excuse that the ATO take. So pre-departure planning is critical. You can't go back and fix things once you're over here or once your Australian tax return is lodged. So you make your bed, you have to lie in it. And unfortunately, Brett and I see the latter end of that sometimes, and cleaning up mistakes and whatnot is something that we have to do. So I think a good place to start is the tax residency tests of Australia. Keep in mind these rules were written in 1936, so they do not map towards us today on this call, unless you're, what, 89 years old this year. So not great in that respect. There are new rules that have been kind of proposed. They're not in legislation yet, but we won't see these until maybe 1 July 2026 at the earliest, we think, at this stage. So based off the 1936 rules, there are four tests. If you satisfy one of the four, you will be deemed a tax resident of Australia. First one I like to just tick off is for active government employees only. That is the Commonwealth superannuation test. Unfortunately, you will always be an Australian resident if you satisfy that test. The next one I like to tick off is the 183-day test. So this is the one that makes the headlines because it's more tangible. It's a day count. However, if you go over the 183 days, provided your domicile is also in Australia, which leads into the domicile test. The domicile test is about your permanent dwelling, your usual place of abode. These are fancy words for where do you live, work, and play. Now, living and working is pretty easy to satisfy, rental contract here, your work contract states you work here in the UAE. Where you play is really the question mark in that respect. Just before I move into the next test, there is a dot point underneath this test as well that states if you're not a non-resident of Australia for a period of 2 years, Australia can try and claim you for that full-time period. So we always say do the 2 years, make the decision after that of what you want to do. The last test I go through is the resides test. It's actually the first test, but this is a real gray test, so I always leave it to last. So they look at a number of factors, of which none are decisive. So they kind of look at them as one and how they interact with each other. So they look at your intention and purpose to treat country as home. They look at your behavior, so your continuity, habits, routines. They look at your family location, business employment, location of assets and living arrangement. So very broad categories there. So what we say is, okay, how have you proved you've cut ties with Australia? You have that rental contract or mortgage over here. Your business contract states you work here, at this location in this country. Your personal items have been shipped or sold. So this is where we like to talk about cars. Why would a UAE resident have a Hilux in Australia? They wouldn't. So getting rid of that or transferring it to someone else's name. You've cancelled memberships. You've updated correspondence with, banks, ATO to an overseas address, and you've done things like take yourself off the electoral rolls. So asking yourself the question, would an Emirati, which is a local person here, would they ... So would an Emirati have a property in Australia? Yeah, sure. It's a great investment. Why wouldn't they? Would an Emirati be using things like Medicare? No, they wouldn't have Medicare. So not using things like that is critical. Cool. So superannuation and investments. If you just want to flick to the next slide, Brett. So superannuation. Superannuation is agnostic to residency. So it is just going to continue as is in the background. Obviously stays in Australia, but you are subject to contribution limits, as I'm sure you're aware, and the tax treatment of those. So often, or a common one that we all have probably witnessed is our employer making contributions for us back in Australia. That reduces your taxable income. It's a pre-tax contribution. When you're a non-resident, if you don't have any income in Australia, you wouldn't want to make that contribution because that contribution actually gets taxed at 15% as opposed to, what your marginal tax rate would be in Australia. So more common ones we see are post-tax contributions, which are called non-concessionals, which people do in preparation for retirement back in Australia. So continuing to top that up. Consolidating your super before you leave, that applies if you have more than one account. I think I saw a situation the other day come across my desk, someone living out here for 8 years and they had something like 6 super accounts. They're being wasted away in administration fees, insurance premiums and whatnot. Other things we look at in super: are you invested in the right investment for your risk profile, age to access? You can't access these until age 60 minimum based off current rules. Do you have insurance inside your super? Is it still valid while you're overseas? Are you in an expat friendly fund? Can you still make contributions while you're overseas? And then around capital gains as well. So a lot of people don't know there's actually tax inside super, and that capital gains tax is between 10 to 15% in a lot of those industry funds, which will be charged right before you retire. So we do super reviews too. SMSFs, so self-managed super funds are a type of super fund. As the name suggests, it is self-managed. However, it is under a different structure, which the Labor government dislike. Firstly, outright, they also dislike non-residents. So those two go hand in hand, where you cannot have a self-managed super fund while you're overseas. That is around the central management and control of the super fund. That's a fancy word for day-to-day decisions have to be made within Australia. So therefore, if you're outside of Australia, you can't make those day-to-day decisions, unfortunately. So thinking about what to do with your super fund or self-managed super fund is important as well. All right, investment. So the day you leave Australia becomes very important from a tax perspective, because on that day, your assets should split into two. On one side, we have non-taxable Australian property. So these are things like shares, managed funds, ETFs, cryptocurrency also falls under these assets. On the day you leave, you have the option to say to the ATO, okay, this is the asset value on the date that I leave. Here's my capital gains tax, and then you can make those assets non-taxable Australian property. Think of that as an exit tax out of Australia, which sucks for the people that have it happen to them. But where it benefits us is this reverse situation now. So Brett and I are sitting here in the UAE. If we invest in XYZ asset, call it BHP back in Australia, then we go back to Australia in 10 years to become a resident. On the day we arrive back, they'll say, okay, what's the value of BHP on that date? And that will be our cost from an Australian tax perspective. It's called a deemed acquisition on that date. Essentially, what I'm saying to you is we can invest capital gains tax-free while we're here, which we should. We're in a tax-free jurisdiction. We shouldn't be taxed on that amount. All right. Now, on the other side, we have taxable Australian property. These are, apartments, blocks of land, houses back in Australia. They will continue as is from an Australian tax perspective. And what I mean by that is you'll still have to lodge a tax return with income minus expenses. Whatever that figure is at the end, if it's positive, you'll pay tax on the first dollar at 30%. That is the base rate for a non-resident of Australia. If that figure is negative, i.e. the property is negatively geared, you generate what's called a tax loss. So tax losses accrue each year and you can actually use them at a later date when you return. So from a strategy perspective, getting taxed at 30% here is not tax effective, whereas tax losses can be accrued and used in the future. From a capital gains perspective, so if this is just an outright investment property, you've never lived in it, in Australia, you get that 50% capital gains tax discount if you hold an asset for over 12 months and then you sell it. You get that 50% discount. That is not true for your time period of non-residency. So just putting an example out there, if you hold an investment property for 10 years, 5 years as a resident and 5 years as a non-resident, then you sell that property, the discount percentage is going to be 25% because 50% of the time was a non-resident on a 50% discount. So just so you're aware of that, every day you're outside of Australia, that discount percentage is coming down. Now, if you lived in a property, i.e. it's your principal place of residence, as I'm sure you know, if you sold that property, it would be capital gains tax free if you're an Australian resident. However, the day you set foot outside of Australia, that main residence is lost periodically. So what they will do if you sell the property on day one of becoming a non-resident is they will tax you all the way back to the date you purchased it. So we say over here, sell a liver, sell a kidney or a kid, but don't sell that main residence while you're overseas. What the tax office do allow for is for you to classify that main residence for 6 years. So you can move overseas, live overseas for 5 years, then you move back to Australia. You can still sell that property capital gains tax free because you're in that 6 year window. If you go over 6 years, so let's say, you're over here for 10 years and then you return to Australia, then you want to sell that property, 6 years will be capital gains tax free of that time period you're away. 4 will not be. That will be at a full tax rate, no discounts because you're a non-resident. The key to this rule is you have to be a resident of Australia at the time of sale. So that is really the key. Another consideration that you may not have taken into account is land tax. So once properties move from principal places of residence to more investment properties, they do become more expensive from a land tax point of view.
Righto, Adam. Thank you very much. That was pretty well said. And I think, just looking at the questions coming through on the chat right now, I think people are a bit shocked. So yeah, it is different, guys. Even though you're an Aussie passport and you can wear R.M. Williams and and a Kubra hat, doesn't make a difference. When you get over here, as Adam and I like to say, you're an Emirati from a tax point of view, and you'll be taxed accordingly. So just take that into consideration when you are looking at moving overseas, because there are a lot of moving parts that happen, and we do accumulate assets over time, and these assets, just because they look the same, may not be treated the same. Right, yeah, so now I'm going to run through and talk about Dubai versus Abu Dhabi, a bit of a lifestyle versus cost. And for those folks who are new to the region, look, Dubai is like the show pony, fast, flashy, it's the Gold Coast versus the Brisbane, is the way I like to sort of describe it to clients. Abu Dhabi is the capital. It's polished. It's more measured, a bit more family-centric, a lot, calmer. I've got to say, I do love when I drive down to Abu Dhabi, things are a lot more chilled. Whereas there's that great saying about Dubai sort of reminds me of that raccoon on meth. It's just a very crazy, but in a good way, sort of city. So if depending on what you're seeking, either of those cities will be attractive. And what a lot of folks do is they might choose Abu Dhabi for the quieter life, but then Dubai is only an hour down the road, and you can get to the crazy and then return back to your peaceful existence down in Abu Dhabi. So it's both are as equally as good as each other, but just different is the best way to describe it. So sort of broke down a couple of pros and cons when you look at Dubai versus Abu Dhabi. So on the pro side, Dubai, it's the commercial hub. A lot of headquarters here, startup agencies, multinationals. Networking is almost like a sport here, and you'll never go short of being able to go out and meet people. What more diverse job market? So there's a lot more industry and different types of careers in Dubai versus Abu Dhabi, and that's probably why Dubai is more appealing from that point of view. Obviously, with Dubai, we've got the free zones for those who are looking to set up companies. Free zones are not really a thing in Abu Dhabi, apart from the ADGM. So if you are an SME or a business coming out of Australia, Dubai is probably going to be your port of call. On the cons, look, intense competition, longer hours in certain sectors, burnout's real. In Dubai, you pretty much answer the phone during the day and at night. You respond to messages day and night. So there's no such real thing as work-life balance. Not that I think that's a thing. I think it's a bit of a unicorn, to be honest with you. I mean, there's always a trade-off between one or the other. You can't quite get it right. If you do, let me know and I'll do it myself. But long story short, the hours are longer, the intensity's there, and some people love that, the thrill of the hustle, the thrill of the chase type scenario. Obviously, higher churn rate, industries will change quicker. As opposed to Abu Dhabi, which is more rooted in more traditional government or local family businesses. In Dubai, it's, all nationalities own companies. So they're prone to reacting quickly and sometimes for the better or for the worse. On Abu Dhabi's pros and cons, strong government-backed institutions, a lot of sovereign wealth, the energy, the aviation sector. They are making a big push into AI down there. They've actually just about to open up the world's first AI university, I believe. So very much trying to foster that, future tech. Roles can be more stable, bit more benefits from a generous because they tend to be older fashioned contracts, and work days are a bit more civilized. And if you work for a government agency down there, sometimes you don't even have to go to work on a Friday, or at least you do a half day up until prayers at lunchtime on Friday. A lot of big things going on down there, museums, the education side, the healthcare side. Clean energy is a big push, and they're really trying to diversify the Abu Dhabi economy, and they're quite aggressive at doing it as well too. On the con side with Abu Dhabi, the job market is narrower. So there's not the same diversity of industry and the same diversity of companies. So if your skill set matches, sort of what's there, then you've got a very good chance. But if it's a little bit different, then you might end up doing what most folks do is, if one partner's going to Abu Dhabi, the other one's going to Dubai, one of you has to commute, or you might live about halfway at around Gantut. Networking scene's smaller and more formal. It's more of a, sort of a process down there, as opposed to up here. It's like speed dating is the best way to describe networking in Dubai. So cost of living wise, obviously on Dubai side, big choice of properties. You've got JBR if you like the beach, downtown if you want urban, in the centre near the financial district. Out in the suburbs, in the burbs, you got Arabian Ranches, Mudon, Mira, Victory Heights. The list goes on. There's a lot of suburban lifestyles out there, and you got the marina side, the old town side. So there's a choice for everyone. 9 times out of 10, it'll be your budget that dictates where you choose to live. Plenty of modern apartments and villas. Lots of new supply. It is ridiculous. I think I read in the month of July there were 50 property development releases. That's not 50 properties, that's developments. And each development might have 100, 200, 1,000, sort of apartments or villas in it. So lots of supply coming up. The cons, rents are in the hot area when hot areas can sting. Not cheap at all for rents. So we're now up there with Australia and rapidly closing in on many other countries. Schooling and lifestyle, they are expensive. One of the biggest changes that I noticed here was when my daughters went to school, any ECAs or extracurricular activities, you pay it. So on top of the school fees, you've got those sporting events as well too. So that adds up very quickly. And the popular enclaves can feel transient and tourist heavy. So if you are wanting to live near the beach in JBR, you'll be there along with the tourists, and there's no real sort of community there. It's everyone's there doing what they want to do. On Abu Dhabi's, generally better space for money on housing, more villas, less apartments. That is starting to change. Quieter neighbourhoods, green belts, and they're very much into their community facilities. So they do that very, very well. The cons on Abu Dhabi, fewer distinct micro neighbourhood identities. So if you think of places like in Dubai, you'll have 20 buildings around, and you'll have a whole little mini community built around those 20 buildings. So you'll have all your nail salons, your supermarkets, your hairdressers, just everything is there. And quite often you don't have to jump in the car. Abu Dhabi is spread out, so obviously car dependent, but I'd have to say to a lesser degree and probably the similar degree, Dubai is the same as well too. It's very hard to go by without having a car in either city. On the leisure and lifestyle side, Dubai, obviously endless dining, beach clubs, concerts, sports, exhibitions, pop-ups. If you like your shops, shopping malls here are crazy. New one seems to open up every 6 months. And obviously diverse social circles and a lot of expat communities. So in Dubai, there are, 89% expats and 11% Emiratis. Whereas you go down to Abu Dhabi, there's a whole lot higher percentage of Emiratis than in Dubai. So on the con side for Dubai, we call it the FOMO tax. You just, if you can try and stop it, but sometimes you can't. There's so much money to be spent. You always want to do something. That comes with a cost. Everything you want to breathe, it comes with a cost. So you always find you're forking out to do all these events and sports and, going out for dinners and stuff. So it can, add up very quickly. And obviously tourist volumes can crowd popular spots on weekends and holidays, especially over Christmas. This place gets inundated with all people from Europe over Christmas, and it does become very, very busy. On the Abu Dhabi side, on the pros, the great culture down there with a slower pace, which is lovely. They've got the Louvre, they've got the Khazar Al Watan, Saadiyat Island, which is amazing there. That's only relatively new in the last sort of 5 or 6 years. Parks and beaches, they've actually got inland waterways, so boats. If you're into boating, that's a very big thing down in Abu Dhabi. Family-friendly amenities, there's lots of playgrounds, cycling tracks, mangroves, and very much about better wellness. And then obviously you've got Saadiyat and Yaz, the islands with a lot of events, especially Yaz. You've got all the theme parks, you've got the F1, soon to be Disneyland. There's a lot of things going on Yaz Island. On the Abu Dhabi side, on the cons, nightlife is a bit tamer. So if you're a party once a night, twice a week sort of guy or girl, then you might be a bit bored in Abu Dhabi. If you like the bit more laid back approach, then it could suit you well. Not as much diversity on the restaurant and cafe side, but it is improving and that's starting to pick up down there as well too. Okay, family considerations. So the good thing is families are a big thing here. From an Emirati, from a cultural point of view, families are very, very important. So the whole system is designed around families, which is fantastic. So when you're looking at family-friendly areas, there's a lot of gated communities and villa compounds. A lot of space, a lot of security, community feel. There's WhatsApp groups internally that people communicate on, shared pools, tennis courts, paddle courts, you name it. And on site, you'll have a community centre on site with a fast food and shopping centre and supermarkets and those sort of things. Look for neighbourhoods near reputable schools. I always say to clients, when you're coming here, find the school first and then find the area to live in. Otherwise, you'll be living in the car. Biggest reason I say that is because schools here are very, very busy. Quite often they're either a waiting list or you can't even put your name on a list, they're that full. So dial in the school first and then draw a bit of a ring around that area to look for the property. And obviously you want to look for areas where you have all your local amenities. You don't want to have to drive half an hour to get your loaf of bread and your milk. Rental terms, leases are often 1 year and paid in 1 to 4 checks. If you're paying 1 check, you tend to have more negotiating ability than 4 checks. Some landlords flat out refuse to do 4 checks and others are amenable, so that's part of the negotiation. And obviously, rents are typically higher in areas with strong school access. So if there's a school nearby, there's a lot of demand for those properties because like anyone in any part of the world, no one likes to live in traffic. Nice little segue onto the school side. So both Abu Dhabi and Dubai have great schools. I'm a bit biased because my daughters go to schools here and they've been to a couple of them. So we've had our experiences and I can't say it's been a bad experience for them at all. A wide range of selection of schools to choose from. Adam and I were down at the Australian International School on Monday, doing an amazing job down there with Karen, the principal, is an Aussie. And then you've obviously got British, American, IB, so it can become a bit overwhelming selecting a school. So what I normally recommend is dial in on the curriculum you want your kids to study, whether it's IB, British, American, or Australian. And then once you've got that, look at the schools that teach that. You can go on to the KHDA, which is the Education Authority here, and you can go on and actually put in criteria, and that'll give you not only they rank the schools here. Outstanding is the top and poor's down the bottom. So you can go through and say, I want to go to my kids to go to a British school with an outstanding rating and also quote the fees as well too. So it's a very good tool to have for just shortening that list so you can build a bit of a short list. Schools aren't cheap here. It's a 90 billion dirham a year business. So if you're coming from an Australian public school, it'll shock the living daylights out of you. But if you're coming from a private school in Australia, then yeah, it's about the same in terms of fees and charges. It will come back to obviously how will you negotiate your employment contract, whether your employer does or does not include a educational allowance in that. As I said before, popular schools have a waiting list. So you need to be talking really early and put down your 500 dirhams if you can register. If you can do a school tour, a site tour just to see the lay of the land, you can always get a pretty good idea of what school's like, especially during the term. But the biggest bit is try to find a school. You know, one thing that surprised me the most about moving here was in Australia, you find your school, your kids go to school, that's it. Over here, you will move your kids around different schools because schooling and education is a business and you are paying so much money, you don't have to accept things that aren't working for you. So that surprised me, a lot. And people will move their kids around until the kids are happy and the parents are happy, and then we've got a happy home. Location factor is a big one. So you got a bit of a triangle, a school, work, home triangle. So try and keep the kids' commutes low. It is a long day, especially during summer weather. The last thing you want is your kid to be getting off the school bus or getting out of the car at 5 o'clock at night, especially when they start school at 7:30 in the morning. So the school times start earlier over here. Safety and community. So both Dubai and Abu Dhabi are extremely safe. I can say that by conviction. I'm a father of two daughters, and I've never felt once my daughters were in a situation that I worry about, completely different to Australia. Give you an example. My 14-year-old daughter, she goes to the shopping mall with her friends by themselves. I'd never let that happen in Australia. And it's probably one of the nicest things about raising kids here in the UAE is having that peace of mind. Community feel, in the compounds, you'll often have WhatsApp groups and seasonal events, whether it's Ramadan or Diwali, or there's a lot of things that go on, not just, for Christmas is another one, New Year's, Ramadan is another one too. So there's a lot of events that go on inside these communities, and they're fantastic. And quite often the developer of the community will put something on, and it's great to take the kids down. There's obviously WhatsApp groups you can join in each one of those communities, and they're a great tool for getting information, especially when you're new on the ground. Cultural respect, I can't say this enough. There's a lot of new folks who are hitting UAE at the moment, and it is pretty shocking actually what some of the people are getting around in. So just be smart. And I think Aussies are pretty good at that. So I don't think we sort of take it too far, but just be smart when it comes to attire. I'm not talking about it has to be fully covered, but modesty is a very important part of the Emirati culture, and you want to do the right thing. We're in their country, and I think it's only fair. So on to the cultural tips. Obviously we're an Islamic country, so the country is built around Islamic values. It doesn't mean you have to get rid of everything. So alcohol is still a thing here. So, we're talking about things that will, great with the Islamic, not just the Emiratis, but the Islamic religion. So just be smart. That's all I could say. The time it will catch you out is when you go into government buildings, and I've been caught out 1,000 times, and a mate of mine actually carries a pair of long pants in his car because he keeps getting caught out as well too. But if you are going to a government building to, say, renew your driver's license or something on those sort of lines, you can't walk in shorts. So you need to have a full pair of pants for guys. That's probably one of the best tips I could say. On the beach resorts and stuff, you will see Western-style swimsuits with barely their clothing. That's a thing, like it is anywhere in the world, but don't wear it outside the resorts. Please don't do that. Friday's the focal day. So on the Christian faith, Sunday is our church day. In the Islamic culture, Friday is their church day, if I can find the analogy there. So everyone goes to the mosque at midday on Friday. So we used to be on a Sunday to Thursday roster, and Friday and Saturdays were weekends, but now it's Saturday to Sunday. We've aligned with the rest of the world. So keep in mind, stay away from mosques if you're not a Muslim around lunchtime on a Friday, because people will just park anywhere and roads grind to a halt. Public affection, holding hands is fine for married couples, but anything more can draw unwanted attention. So, and you all see it, and these people who are just being sort of culturally insensitive, just be mindful of that. Big one is do not photograph anyone without their permission. There's many, many people who have been deported from the country for taking photos of other people without their permission. And there's no way you want your time here to be besmirched with a deportation. So that's the big one as well too. And it's great because it works on the other side. It protects you, but also protects your kids and provides that safety factor that we all like around this region. Social integration. The good news is, as I said, especially Dubai and to a lesser degree Abu Dhabi, very social sort of places. So Aussies are represented here in a big shape and form. Probably 20 to 22,000 Australians live in the UAE. There's centres around that in Dubai. And don't be concerned by the business names because it's not just business. It's part of it, but not all of it. You know, the Australian Business Council of Dubai and the Australian Business Group in Abu Dhabi. These guys and girls do an amazing job. They put on g'day cafes to welcome new people. They've got networking nights. They've got event nights. They've got golf days. They've got balls. I highly recommend everyone to join the council because especially when you're in a new country that you're not really familiar with, you just get here and you walk into a room and just hear Aussie accents and just takes away all the friction. So definitely do that. There's also a lot of sporting teams here as well too. You got AFL Middle East. So if you like your footy, you can join that. You've got the Vikings Surf Sports, which is Surf Life Saving. So they're affiliated with Surf Life Saving in Australia. There's a lot of Aussies in there. Then you've also got big netball teams, big rugby teams, and they're all well represented by the Australian population, especially the Desert Girls netball too. Meet some Emiratis. I think that's an important part. I've met a couple and then sort of formed a relationship with a couple. I think they're fantastic. You know, quite often the Emiratis have a very close affliction with Australians. You know, they quite often they holiday there through the hot summers here, and they land on the Gold Coast, and you'd be surprised how much in common you actually have. So I think it's if you're going to be here, you know, see if you can achieve that because they're a lovely bunch of people, and I think they've got a lot to be proud of, and they've got a lot to offer as well too. In saying that, you know, English is widely used. So, but you know, certainly learning a few Arabic greetings and phrases will go a long way. Not only just in your day-to-day interactions with government agencies and Arabs, but also Emiratis as well too. They love to see you making an effort in their country. In terms of the traps, I would say underestimating the cost of living. So that's a big one. So obviously top international schools can exceed 30,000 Australian dollars per child. This is actually a bit of an old number. I've seen a lot higher than that now. But then you've got uniforms, transport, you know, and extra ECA fees. Housing surprises, the upfront costs are steep. So you've got the agent's fees, which is 5% of the annual rental amount you have to pay to them in a check when you sign that lease agreement. Then you've got security deposits. That's with the utility providers, you know, 2,000 for an apartment, 4,000 dirhams for a villa. And then obviously you've got to pay all your rent checks up front. So if you're paying in one check, you will pay 12 months worth of rent in one go. Obviously, if you have 4 checks as part of your lease agreement, you give them 4 checks and 1/4 of that annual rent amount will be deducted from your bank account. Lifestyle creep, you know, dining out, brunches and travel. You know, you'll find here it's hard to keep up with everyone who's traveling because anytime there's a public holiday, whether it's a 3-day weekend or a 5-day weekend, people are traveling all the time. So I always say when you're here in the first year, enjoy it, but don't enjoy it too much because by the second year, you're going to want to start to save money. And that's an important part of why we're here. We're not here because of the weather. We're not here because we like sand. We're here for the opportunity and we're here for the financial benefits as well too, and not to mention the other cultural benefits I went through before. So don't try and get too sucked into that lifestyle because it's very hard to claw yourself back out of that. Okay, and last slide I want to share with you good folks is, you know, assuming Australian legal norms apply here. It's definitely not the case. So the UAE has a mix of Sharia law and civil law. So assumptions about contracts, disputes or tenancy rights, you know, can cause a lot of friction. So do your homework. You know, to me, there's a lot of great information on the Australian expat financial groups, Facebook groups for the UAE, both in Dubai and Abu Dhabi. So make sure you join those. checks are a thing here. Yes, they are. They're a pain in the backside. I've never signed a check until I moved here myself. They are a pain. And they can cause, sort of unnecessary angst as well too if your signatures don't match or they're not happy with your handwriting. So just be careful with the checks. Take your time. Obviously, make sure the money's in the account, but also to just take your time when filling it in. And if you're like me, who has the handwriting of a doctor, then focus very carefully. Social media laws are a big thing. So do not criticize anyone on either the government or anyone else for that matter, individuals or companies in the UAE, because there are very strong rules regarding saying bad things about people online. So please be careful of that. There are ways to address that, but just not the Australian way would be the best way to describe it. Aussies, we love to have our say and have our pound of flesh. Over here, you just have to do things differently. The good thing is if you're having a problem with a company, reach out to DED, the Dubai Economic Development Department. They're fantastic. If you have a problem with a company and you've paid for something, it doesn't work, or you paid for something, you haven't received it, don't take it out online on this company. Go to the DED, lodge a complaint. They will call the company in mention, and they will go through and handle it appropriately. And I've always had a very good experience with that. Obviously, WhatsApp caution, offensive language, even in private messages, has led to legal trouble for expats. So once again, just be careful what you write. Not saying you can't chat to your wife or your husband about someone, but anything that could get out, even screenshot, you don't know where it could lead. So just remember, if you're writing it down, do it in a way that if it ever gets out in the public, it's not going to cause you any grief. Rightio, mate. Adam, let's hand it over to the Q&A section there. So we've got lots of questions coming in, and let's get the show on the road there. So I'll throw the first question over to you. If we are presented with an opportunity, do we need to declare our non-residency status when we move or at a later stage?
Yeah, so just on declaring residency, it's a self-assessment method. So you decide whether you're a resident or non-resident of Australia. And then if the ATO want to ask their questions, they have a right to ask their questions, which is why it's important to keep proof of the points we went through today. So how do you do it? You actually do it through a tax return. So for example, if you left 30 June 2025, you'd be lodging a tax return right now. And you would say in the first question, it says, were you an Australian tax resident this year? If you answer no to that question, it'll come up with a date, and you put normally the date you got on the plane to leave Australia. That's how you declare you're a non-resident of Australia.
Yeah, it's a lot more simple than people think. And as you said before, Adam, too, when it comes to changing your tax status, it's sort of the culmination of everything. When you take yourself off the electoral roll and you change your bank statements to show that you've got a UAE address, it's everything that goes along with that. But yeah, that's the easiest way to let the ATO know is when you do your tax return.
Yep. Next one, I'll throw to you, Brett. So just another question around the 6 years on CGT on property. Yeah.
Yeah, so Mohammed has said capital gains tax on property is until 6 years has passed, question mark. Also, if you have your primary residence, there is no CGT. Yeah, so Mohammed, this actually changed on the 1st of July 2020. Atlas was very vocal in lobbying for expats in the lead up to this. It originally was announced back in 2017 and it was pushed heavily. Unfortunately, as of the 1 July 2020, if you are overseas, as Adam talked about before, and you sign a contract to sell that property, you will pay capital gains tax. If you are in Australia, when you sell that property as a resident, it has to be a resident. You can't be there on holidays, but as a resident, then you are you get access to the main resident exemption. So the 6-year rule applies if you are boots on the ground in a permanent capacity and residing in Australia. Right, Adam, I'll throw the next one over to you, mate. I have a government superannuation scheme, PSS, defined benefit. My understanding is that if I cease to be a contributing member of that fund and just leave it sitting there, then it's possible to be a non-resident. Is that correct?
Yeah, you have to be an active contributor to a PSS or CSS super fund. Those are the common government ones. This is in relation to Commonwealth superannuation test for everyone. But yeah, Neil, you need to be an active contributor to be a resident. So yeah, vice versa would work too.
Fantastic. And the next question here, I'll take that
What
one. Yep.
implications are there if you currently a permanent resident of Australia and have lodged a citizenship application, but it's yet to be confirmed at the time you move to Dubai?
I'm going to wave the white flag here and say I'm not an immigration lawyer. I can't bear to be honest with you. I mean, there's some amazing immigration lawyers out there. Jennifer Wood's one of those ones. You'll see her details in many of the Australian UAE Facebook groups, but I couldn't tell you, to be honest with you. That is a minefield when it comes to immigration, the laws and regulations behind that, and I will feign ignorance and run for the hills. Okay, next one for you, Adam. Question regarding residency. If one spouse moves over with a sponsor and local employer, and the other spouse is self-employed, if the self-employed spouse continues to consult with Australian-based clients on, say, a freelance visa and shuts down the Australian business, would that impact the couple's residency status? And would having Australian-based clients for consultation purposes be seen as having a strong connection to Australia?
Yeah, good question. And it's one, we often get. I would say having, you know, residency here in the UAE and working with, clients back in Australia, that's fine. You and your partner move over. It shows that you're residing in another country. Getting Australian sourced income is fine or making money off Australia still. Keep in mind that businesses and your personal residency situation, that they can be different. So my only concern with Australian sourced income is most of the time it is still taxable in Australia. So you're just going to have to check from an accounting point of view how they will classify that income.
That's a spot on point, mate. And I think the one thing we're seeing quite regularly here as well too is when folks move over, but they're still on the Australian payroll. And even though they're living in Dubai, say they pass the resides test, they pass the 183, they pass, well, I should say fail the resides test, fail the 183-day test, fail the Commonwealth Super test. But the ATO's position is that if the work you are doing for that Australian company is consumed in Australia, then those incomes are subject to Australian tax. So you're spot on there. The only time that you really can sort of ring fence that is obviously setting up a company and issuing tax invoices. That shows the domicile and central management and control of those operations in the UAE as opposed to that grey space of floating between the two. Right, our next question. How does
Yep.
RAC... Yep, sorry, Adam. Yeah, go.
Yep. So I reckon you can take this one because I don't know much about RAC. How does RAC, which is Ras Al Khaimah and another emirate here in the UAE, how does that compare to Dubai or Abu Dhabi living? I'm contemplating an executive expat role there. More specifically, how's the work-life balance and is it similar to Dubai or Abu Dhabi?
It's very laid back. RAC's sort of on the ascendancy. So up until 2 or 3 years ago, the primary destination or reason for going to RAC was primarily what we call staycation. I guess everyone calls them staycations, but they used to do a lot of deals up there with the hotels. There's also, you can buy your alcohol up there without paying the tax. So that's another benefit. But now it's really, there's a lot of money going in. The Wynn casinos currently under construction. So things are starting to pick up nowhere near to the scale of what Dubai is going through. And to me, I could see RAC sort of morphing into a bit of a resort city. So it's not going to be the finance and trade hub that Dubai is. That's not their bag, and I don't think they've got any intentions of going down that route. So, in honest answer, if you love a quieter life, then brackets certainly suit. It's a lot cheaper to live up there too. Sometimes half the price when it comes to looking at rents. Dubai is only about an hour down the road, so it's not too bad at all. So it is definitely doable if you work there and want to come down to Dubai for the weekend, that's very, very simple to do. I don't mind RAC. It's a bit of a sleeping city, I guess is the way to describe it. Doesn't quite have, sort of the boulevards and the polish of Abu Dhabi and Dubai, but when you're in that environment 24/7 a day, it's actually nice to go somewhere that doesn't have that polish. So I hope that gives you the right answer there, Anonymous. Right, Adam, a question for you. Great insights. I just moved here a month ago. I'm keen to know if there are any tax implications for all the assets or capital gains we make in the UAE when we go back to Australia and take all of our assets and liquidated money back home with us.
Yeah, thanks for this question. Any capital gains you make while a resident of the United Arab Emirates will be capital gains tax-free. If you still hold those assets when you return to Australia, so I'm assuming you're talking about shares or UAE property, for example, on the day you arrive back in Australia, the assets will be revalued as at that date from an Australian tax perspective, and that will be your cost from an Australian tax perspective. So if you sold on day one of being an Australian resident, you'd be only up for a day capital gain or loss on whatever asset you hold.
Good answer, mate. Good answer. Okay, on to the next question.
Yep. So if I have my spouse and kids living in Australia in a home under joint name, I'm here and have not traveled back to Australia for 2 years, would I be considered as an Australian for tax purposes? How can I change it when my family continues to live there?
This is the tough one. And there's a lot of people under this situation, and I knew it would fall onto me, not you, Adam. So thanks very much, mate.
Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, Saudi. It's still Saudi all over again. Look, I mean, the honest answer is when these rules were written, as Adam said at the beginning of the webinar, these rules were written in 1936. So the lifestyle that we lead today has no correlation to what was life like back in 1936. The honest answer is it's very grey. There is no black and white answer for you. And the ATO is very famous for opening a wedge, I guess you could say, when it comes to making a mountain out of a molehill. We've obviously gone to extreme lengths, not going home in 2 years. The only way that you can change it is waiting for the new legislation to come out. So under the new legislation, right now it's very subjective and ethereal, resides test and behaviours and domicile and all these sort of old worldy sort of words. Under the new scheme, the way that's going to work is it's very much built around snakes and ladders, yes and no, black and white sort of binary sort of questions. And as long as you go through that process and you hit no on those questions, you can have 5 wives back in Australia and 15 kids. You won't be treated as a tax resident. The biggest question is going to be is, A, when's that legislation going to come through? As Adam mentioned before, could be as early as 1 July 2026, but we are talking about Canberra here. They're not exactly known for moving quickly on these things. So it could be 1 July 27, 1 July 28. Follow our website, and I've put up on the screen there our social media channels. Have a look and follow those, because when we have more clarity as to timing and the exact details, we're still very light on details. That'll be a very big defining moment for Australian expats, and certainly for the anonymous attendee, that'll make your life a lot simpler. If you do have questions in the meantime that you'd like to be clarified, this is to the post of the anonymous attendee, hit us up on our website at atlaswealth.com. You can do get in contact with us, and we have a bit of a questionnaire as to services you're looking at. One of those services is run by Ben Turner and his team at Atlas Tax, which is a division of Atlas Wealth Group. And he can do what's called a departure review. So 60 minutes, and he'll go through all of your details in finite detail to find out where the gaps are and to try and close them. You can never close them completely. You'll always will have gaps, because obviously we're talking about tax rules that are almost 100 years old. But, I'd say if you do have concerns, hit us up and we'll put you in touch with Ben and his team, and you can do a review. In the meantime, waiting for the new laws to come is probably the only thing you can actually do there. Okay, Adam, a question for you. If I was to move to the UAE after a potential legislation change 1st of July 2026, how practical would it be to purchase or rent a property without an EID to avoid having to pay tax on income? Curly question for you.
Yeah, so just to be clear, those 1st of July 2026 potential changes was on the Australian tax residency side. And then your question around having an EID to purchase or rent a property, the EID is kind of the base for everything. For example, I need to show my EID this week to get a lease for a property. For rental, in terms of purchasing, I know there are a lot of foreign purchases here, so I think it may be potential to be able to do that. Avoiding paying tax on income, that would mean you'd have to be a resident here as well, so you'd have to live here and get that EID.
It's actually a really good point. So I'll run through that as well too. So there's two ways you can get residency and an Emirates ID. One is a work visa, one's a residency visa. Most people come here under a work visa. They get a job, their employer sponsors them, and then they get an Emirates ID and a visa to be here. The other way is you can buy a property. Now, by buying a property doesn't mean you get a work visa. Just means you have the legal right to live here. And that way you will get an Emirates ID. However, in saying that, it doesn't mean you can work. The exception to that is obviously if you go down the route of buying a property and then applying for a golden visa, which is the 10-year visa. In that case, you can work here. So as you can see, it's a very different system to the way Australia works. But, for Shane's question there, I would say, if you are, looking to avoid having paid tax on income in Australia, the only way you can do that is get your butt on the plane as soon as possible and become a non-resident, because buying a property in the UAE is not going to give you that ability. Alrighty, Adam, a question for you. Can I keep my house in Australia while I move to the UAE and still keep paying my mortgage repayments the same way as before residing in Australia?
Yep, simple answer. Yeah, you definitely can.
Yeah. Now look, it maps to what we talk about with a lot of clients. We talk about repatriation of capital. We talk about can I move money back to Australia? There's a lot of concern and there's a lot of myths around that. Of course you can. As long as your money going back to Australia has intent, then you are fine. If your money's going back to Australia to pay a mortgage, that's fine. If the money's going back to go into an investment account, that's fine. If your money's going back to Australia to sit in a bank account and gather dust, that's what's going to raise a red flag. Right, Adam, on to the next question, mate.
Yeah, so I think we've kind of answered this one, but you can probably add a little bit more. If my husband stays here working and I move back to Australia, does that affect my husband with regards to tax back home in Australia?
Look, yeah, sort of similar to the last situation. Family ties to Australia is a big thing. There was a court case early this year with a gentleman who'd been in UAE for 5 years, and his wife and kids lived in Perth. He owned cars in Australia. He drove them on return. Only went back between 2 and 4 weeks a year, so not big visits back to Australia. But the High Court ruled that he is actually a tax resident of Australia. So he ended up paying Australian tax on all of his UAE income, which is an expensive bill. So the big thing you need to consider is those unknown unknowns under these current tax rules. So in terms of there has to be a pretty good reason as to why you're not together. Some people, there might be a medical reason or a schooling reason or something that it doesn't exist in the UAE that does in Australia. That's why the family is separated. But if it's a personal choice because you might get sunburnt and you don't like the region, then it's going to be a hard sell. Right, Adam, a question for you. Hot tip, Arabic version of government websites will take precedence over English versions. So have someone vet the right information for you or contact the public department you need help from. Same with contracts. Arabic version takes precedent over English versions. Yeah, no, it's a good point. And I've actually come across this before. And I've actually said to the UAE government, this was involved when we were setting up Atlas, and I said, well, look, it was your translation because I hit English on your website and that's what it said. So they agreed that the English version was incorrect. The Arabic version was correct, but also too depends on what you're looking at those versions. So just be careful. And that's what sort of comes back to what I was saying before, that things are different here. Just because it says it doesn't mean it is. So um, I always say data mining is an incredible tool here when you become an expat in the UAE. There's a lot of Aussies here as well as many other nationalities. And guess what? They're all willing to help you. So if you have any questions, then certainly ask away. Right, Adam. Question for you. Do you have any advice on retirement visas for Abu Dhabi?
Look, I know it's quite a new thing that has come out. Can't say I'm awfully experienced in it, but I assume it would just give you a right to reside in Abu Dhabi and live in the Emirates. So, yeah, I'm not too sure about that actually.
The only thing I'd add, and it's always been a bit of a barrier to the UAE being seen as a retirement destination, because for 6 months of the year, it'd be amazing, from a weather point of view and everything. It's health insurance. The cost of insuring someone in retirement is incredibly expensive. As an example, I was talking to our insurance broker the other day who organises Atlas's health insurance for the team, and he was saying he got a 82-year-old insured the other day, and his bill was 56,000 US dollars. So if you've got the pockets, by all means, it's not an issue, and I think over time, I reckon this will be resolved because the government will see this as a market they need to tap into. But at the moment, look, retirement visa here be fantastic. 6 months of the year here, maybe 3 months in Australia, 3 months in Europe, and it sounds like a great lifestyle. But getting around the health insurance is always the biggest problem. Okay, on to the next question.
Is it advisable to close all Australian bank accounts? So the answer to that is no. We do want to keep Australian bank accounts, particularly if you are going to move back at some point, or things like withdrawing superannuation in the future. So I had a client situation the other day where he's trying to open a bank account but lives overseas, and it is a bit of a rigmarole process to get there. What we just generally don't suggest is the ATO don't like large sums of cash for non-residents just sitting in bank accounts. That looks suspicious. Why is that money there? So as Brett touched upon before, as long as there's a purpose for it being there, then you should be fine.
Yeah, I've had many clients trying to open up bank accounts back in Australia from overseas, and it's next to impossible. So very rarely do they make it happen, and 9 times out of 10 it involves a plane trip back to Oz and expensive plane tickets. So at least keep one. 9 times out of 10, you are going to need to transfer money back for some reason, whether it's to help a family member, pay a mortgage, pay school fees or something. And it does make life a lot easier. Okay, next one. Not sure what's relevant here is for the job market, are companies hiring directly or recruitment agencies playing a big role in the UAE market? Look, I would have to guess here because neither myself or Adam, sort of got involved in that space here. But I would say it depends on the job, depends on the industry, depends on the market, to be honest with you. So I think word of mouth is a very big part in the UAE in getting a job. So knowing that is a very important part of what you do. Um, LinkedIn is a very big thing here, a lot more than LinkedIn Australia. There's websites like Indeed, but you've got to remember too, with LinkedIn, you'll get thousands of applications for one job from around the world. So you've got to be a bit more intentional, I guess you could say, if you are hunting for a particular job, connecting with the person on LinkedIn, sending them messages as opposed to going through a general job ad. Networking is a big thing as well too. So it's a bit of a mess, to be honest with you. Sorry, the anonymous. I can't really give you a defined answer, but certainly applying from overseas doesn't seem to be the right way. From our experience with clients, if they are hired from overseas, they've been approached overseas. Whereas if you're applying from overseas inward, you almost get lost in the mess of, the 100 other countries and people who are trying to apply for that job as well too. Right, Adam, let's try and get through these. We've still got a lot more questions actually.
Yeah, I think they keep flowing through.
That's right. So let's get through them. Okay. Is buying an Australian property as an investment strategy something Atlas recommends and consists with?
Yeah, so look, a lot of people do buy Australian property. However, if you buy it while you're over here, and then you move back to Australia and want to sell that property, you'll be paying capital gains on that property to the ATO for the full growth of that, no CGT discount. So from an investment's point of view, it's not very tax effective at all.
And look, I agree with Adam, but sometimes people want a bit of a balance, bit of a blend. We can help. We've got our mortgage division. So Jeremy and the team there, they specialize in sourcing expat mortgages. So we can do it. But as Adam said, if you're looking at an Excel spreadsheet answer in terms of what am I going to get most bang for my buck when it comes to a net tax return, then unfortunately Canberra's made property not very appealing asset for expats. Okay, next question. What all docs have to be notarized? Does my education degree have to be notarized before attestation, or can original be attested directly from DFAT? Pretty much attest everything is my answer. So marriage certificate, birth certificates, degrees, just get the whole lot done. They're going to want them. So when it comes to sponsoring your family, they're going to want to see that you are the father. The only way they'll believe that is if the UAE and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs here has attested it. So there's a process, whether it's notarized or whether it's going through the DFAT, it all have to go through Canberra, the UAE embassy in Canberra. Just get it done, because the amount of times people get over here and then realise, I forgot a document, and it's not prohibitively expensive, but it's not cheap to get documents attested once you're over here. So definitely, just if you've got anything, it's just bite the bullet and do it. Okay, on to the next question for you, Adam. Touched on investment property. Can we continue to hold investment properties as non-residents?
Yeah, you most definitely can. Just noting again that any income you earn off that property will be taxable in Australia on the first dollar at 30%.
Fantastic. Okay, that's good. So as we're going through these questions, there's actually more coming through. So we're just going to try and get through these as quick as possible. Are utilities a part of the 5% rental lease charge, or is it separate? I wish it was part of it, and it's definitely not, and it's definitely separate. So one of the biggest surprises here, how you can consume the same amount of water and electricity through the year, but the flag fall rate for electricity will go through the roof over summer. So it's not uncommon for your summer, what we call DEWA here in Dubai, Dubai Electricity and Water Authority, your DEWA bill to go up 3 to 4 times what you're paying through winter. So brace for that one. When you're doing your budgets, make sure you're putting a lot of fat for margin there, because they can get pretty frosty. Adam, the next question for you. Can you also prepare a private ruling for non-residency for tax purposes, and how much do you charge? I'll quickly handle that if you want.
Yeah, no, I can go for it. So our Atlas tax team can prepare private rulings for non-residency. However, it's not cheap. So I think it's around 5,000 Australian dollars to do that. So it would have to be worth your time and money.
Okay, next question. If I move out to Dubai, but my family stays back in Australia, I'm a tax resident or not, what will be the outcome of the residence test in this case? Look, unfortunately, we can't give you an answer to that one, because there's so many variables, as Adam and I have said. There's so many moving parts when it comes to ties to Australia and why your situation is what it is. And I definitely recommend you sort of getting a review from the Atlas tax team to just go through that. It's not as expensive or as intense as a private ruling. It's an internal rather than a receiving ATO approval, but it will probably give it more clarity on that one there. Okay, Adam, next question for you. Should we consider cancelling existing insurances, TPD, critical illness, etc., when moving?
Okay, look, we can't give insurance advice while we're over here, but generally, when clients move across from Australia, if they have life TPD or income protection back in Australia, we generally keep them, just because if you want to move back at some point, a lot of them get them through their super funds, and that's around that.
Good answer. Another question from Anonymous. Can you please clarify the super contributions? Can we still contribute the minimum? Certainly can. Minimum's $1. So there's no issues with that, as long as it's not in a self-managed super fund, because if you do have a self-managed super fund and you put $1 or plus more in, it'll be deemed or fail the active members test, and you'll lose 46% of the balance. If you have a standard industry retail fund, you can certainly contribute, There are pre-tax contributions, as Adam talked about before, and then post-tax contributions, which is like out of your own pocket. Post-tax, don't pay any tax on the way in, limits $120,000 a year. Pre-tax is when you're taking pre-Australian sourced income, like rental income, if you are generating positive cash flow on a property, and you put that into super, that'll be taxed at 15%, and it has a maximum tax rate of maximum limit of 30,000 Australian dollars. Okay, Adam, next one on to you, mate. Currently,
So
yep.
yeah. Currently, if the only investments that you have in Australia are ETFs/shares, will you be taxed on that? So that goes back to the point of when you leave Australia, if you have given them the capital gains tax, i.e. you have deemed dispose of that asset, suddenly that becomes non-taxable Australian property, i.e. any capital growth of the shares, once you do that, will be tax-free. However, what Australia do have is if you earn a dividend from a share, a 15% withholding tax has to be taken out of that dividend and paid to the ATO directly. So a lot of platforms in Australia will not do that for you, and you will have to edit that in a tax return.
Good answer, mate. My turn. You said you have to declare ourselves a non-resident after 2 years. If we don't declare ourselves a non-resident, we still have to pay tax on foreign income. No, so there's two components here. In the year of your departure, the financial year of departure, when you do your tax return for that year, then you'll notify the ATO you're a non-resident. So we are now in August. If you left Australia to move to Dubai in August, you would do your tax return in July next year, which is the end of this financial year, and you'd tell the ATO that you're a non-resident and you departed on this date. What Adam was referring to with the 2 years is short of coming back to Australia for holidays, you can't return permanently back to Australia within 2 years because the ATO will look at that as a temporary move, not a permanent move. And then you will subject yourself possibly to Australian tax on your UAE income. So that'd be an expensive experience to go through. Okay, Adam, over to you, mate.
Yep. So it's, can we receive dividend income in Australian bank accounts if we are non-tax residents? So the answer to that is yes. But again, that withholding tax of 15% will have to be paid to the ATO eventually.
Spot on. Okay, next question. Implications of having a remaining balance on your HEX loan in Australia moving to Dubai. Not really the end of the world. What it relates to is essentially, as of 2017, they brought in new rules that say if you do have a HEX debt living overseas or HEX help or the other one, T or something, if you do have that debt, then you have to make a lodgement every year and advise the ATO of what your annual salary is. And then they will determine what the best way is to charge you based on the thresholds that exist. So you do need to make repayments. You need to pay that down. If you're almost to the end and almost paid it off, just pay it off before you leave if you can. If not, it's not the end of the world. It just means you have to start telling the ATO how much you earn. Believe it or not, you also have 7 days to notify the ATO of your foreign address when you land too. So just be aware of that one. Okay, Adam, over to you, mate.
Yep. So the next one is, while we're being overseas, can we refinance our loan? How will the lender treat us for the loan? So yeah, Atlas Mortgages deal in this space. They specialize in getting loans for people overseas. Banks in Australia have different risk requirements for expats. So for example, if your Brett and I were trying to get a loan back in Australia, some banks may actually take tax out of our projected income for lending purposes and how much they'll lend us money. Yeah, every bank is different, and Atlas Mortgages specializes in that.
Fantastic, mate. Good answer. Next question. Should we lodge our non-residency notification to the Australian government at the time of departure? Which organisations should we approach? Essentially, obviously, the Department of Immigration knows you're going, so that's a given. The ATO will know when you do your tax return. As far as places like the Australian Electoral Commission, you can take yourself off that register as well too, that you don't have to wait till go to do that. You just tell them you are going overseas. You can notify Medicare. These things can be done either pre or post departing Australia. So, but there's nothing at the time of departure you have to do, but there's good caretaking stuff that needs to be taken care of on that side. Okay, Adam, next question for you, mate. Whoops, sorry, I think I just, no, it's all right.
So yeah, the next one is what is your recommendation if one has a PTY LTD in Australia and becomes non-resident? Is winding up the company better before becoming a non-resident? So just noting PTY LTDs or companies back in Australia, there will always be Australian taxable entities, i.e. that company earns income, it'll be taxed at between 25 and 30% in Australia. Now, the problem you'll run into, Mohammed, is down the track, the only ways to get money out of companies is through dividends or from a salary, that you draw a salary from that company. That will, again, be taxed in Australia because it's an Australian taxable entity. So maybe a bit of cleanup required there.
Okay, thanks, mate. Question from Anthony. If we're setting up a new free zone business to sponsor ourselves to move over and have plans to sell the business or business IP in the future, does the quality of the free zone matter? The answer is yes, and not for the reasons you think so. Now, the quality of the free zone would dictate one little important thing. Can you get a bank account? So some people will go down the route of getting a cheap and easy free zone, won't cost them a lot of money in some, sort of non-central location. And you'll find because of the various types that those free zones attract, that none of the banks will want to set up a bank account from a money laundering and know your client rule framework type of view. So, Anthony, I guess I would say buy once, cry once. So if you can, if there's a better one, always go with the better one, because the amount of times we see people pay a lot of money for not good advice when it comes to those business structures and then have to spend the same amount again to restructure is very important. So yeah, always make sure you speak to people who know what they're doing. There's a massive business here, a massive market right now where people absolutely charging like a wounded bull for absolute crap advice when it comes to company formation. So make sure you do speak to credible people who know what they're talking about. Okay, Adam, on to your question with Karina.
Yeah. So do you get the CGT discount granted if you have moved back to Australia after having lived in the UAE for 10 years? This ties into another question a bit further down saying, could Adam please re-explain the CGT on investment properties based on time owned as a non-resident versus time owned as a resident? So if you're an Australian resident, full stop, and you own an investment property and you reside in Australia for the full time period and you want to sell that property, whatever the growth of the property in that time is, you will get a 50% capital gains tax discount. However, if you set foot overseas, the 50% discount will start coming down each day you're outside. So doing an example, if you hold an investment property for 10 years, 5 years, you've held it as a resident of Australia, then you move to the UAE for 5 years. At that point, 10-year period, you say, I want to sell that property. You're not going to get the full 50% capital gains tax discount anymore because there's half the time period outside of Australia. So essentially it'll be half the discount percentage of 50%, which is 25%.
Yep, well answered, mate. That's good. Okay, on to the next question. Can I keep my house in Oz while I move to the UAE and still keep paying the mortgage in the same way? Can I send money? Yep, okay. I think we'll cover that. So there's no dramas at all with holding that. Just the taxing rights will change and the way that you manage that will change from a returns point of view. Okay, on to the next one, Adam, all yours.
If we own a property in the UAE, are we subject to taxes once moving back to Australia? Any tax structures we can use? Yeah, look, Australia, once you're a resident of Australia, you will be taxed on worldwide income, which would include property income here from rent. There are some structures out there that you can move properties into. However, you wouldn't be able to draw any of the income out of those structures while an Australian resident.
That's right. Yeah, you only pay tax on what you receive. So if it's held up within the entity, it's fine. Some clients I've seen going from living in a property as a PPR to move back to Australia and then using a family trust in Australia to buy that UAE property. That's another way you can do it as well too. There's no problems at all with that. So, but yeah, it does get complicated. It's like sort of rubbing your head and patting your stomach at the same time. Next question here from Anonymous. What are your thoughts on Key versus the ATO case? Yeah, that's the case I was referring to earlier this year. Um, I was pretty shocked, to be honest with you. So here's a guy, I think his situation's a bit more permeating in terms of he was working for an Australian company in the UAE. His wife and kids live in Australia. I was quite shocked by the lengths that the court went to determine his sense of permanence, to the point of actually commenting on the he had IKEA furniture, which is temporary in nature. So yeah, I was actually quite shocked by it. I mean, to be honest with you, but it shows that the current rules aren't workable. And the sooner we get these new rules in, it takes away the ambiguity and all the guesswork out of it. Okay, Adam, next question on to you, mate.
Yep. So any tips or tricks to managing frequent travel whilst in the Middle East, looking to make the most of being halfway across the world? Yeah, look, we are very close to Europe over here, which is a great benefit. I think Greece and Croatia are probably like 4 and 5 hours away, so not far away. Um, there are great deals as well. So I live on the side of Dubai where Abu Dhabi airport's just as far away as Dubai airport. So you have the benefit of that too. There are cheap airlines as well. So yeah, the world's your oyster over here.
I think the other thing I would say too is every year the KHDA publish their school calendar. If you travel outside of school holidays and public holidays, you'll get good deals. If you try and travel during school holidays or public holidays, then you'll pay. So if you have that flexibility, then great, enjoy it. Okay, Adam, under the new rule one, who was already sorry, under the new rule, who was already a non-resident?
Yeah. So with these new rules being proposed, it's not who is already a non-resident, it's who's going to be a non-resident from that point forward. Now, the new rules are more black and white, i.e. it's going to be easier to say yes or no if someone is a resident. However, the day count becomes critical with the new rules, and it looks like the day count will be somewhere between 45 and 90 days time period in Australia. If you go over that day count, then you fall into the next test, which is 4 factors. If you fail 2 of the 4 factors, Australia will classify you as a resident. So those factors are, number one, the right to reside in Australia. I would probably say 95% of us on this call will fail that test. Number two is if you have a spouse or child under 18 in Australia, that's a factor. Number three is the accommodation test. So that's if you have a property that's uninhabited in Australia, i.e. no one lives in it. And then the last one is economic interest. So if you have a property in Australia, full stop. If you have large cash balances in bank accounts, we think that figure will be around 250,000. If you're a beneficiary of a family trust, participation in a business, etc. So if you fail 2 of the 4 of those factors plus the day count, you'll be an Australian resident.
Mate, good answer. Oh yeah, my turn. From Nigel, transfer cash to an interest-free offset account to minimise mortgage interest. Okay, sub 100,000. Offset accounts are okay, but comes back to the financial premise of being careful with an offset account. It's not the holy grail that we all think it is as when we're tax residents in Australia. The reason being is holding too much cash in an offset account reduces your largest tax deduction, which is interest cost. And we see a lot of folks, they build up their offset account, reduces their tax deductions, suddenly pushes them into positive cash flow. And then from there, now they're paying 30% tax on the first dollar. So quick answer to your question, Nigel. Yes, mate, go for it. There's no problems at all doing that, but just be careful on the financial outcomes you're looking at. Also, too, investment returns on offset accounts aren't the greatest because you don't get the power of compounding. As an example, $100,000 getting a 7% rate of return, or let's call it 6 because that's what mortgages are at. At the end of the year, that 106, it's 106,000 if you put that in the market versus you got a $6,000 benefit by offsetting that mortgage interest. But the next year, shares are now getting 6% on 106,000, whereas the mortgage offset, you're only getting 6% on 100,000. So the bank's actually taking your money off you and not letting you magnify it, I guess you could say. So yeah, so just be, careful about, do your homework on that. But in terms of the actual process of transferring back, then that's not a problem at all. Okay, Adam, a question for you.
Did you just do Australian credit card?
No, I haven't done that one. Sorry,
Okay,
missed
so
that one.
can I keep my Australian credit card while living here in the UAE? The answer is, look, yes, you can, but what's the purpose of it? Would an Emirati have an Australian credit card? No, they probably wouldn't. So I just wouldn't renew it when the time came. They have plenty of credit cards out here.
Yep, good call. Okay, next one to me. Should we transfer all current home loans to investment loans? It's a conversation only people can have with their bank. I can't advise on that. Depends on your bank, depends on what you've got. Clients who have done it in the past said the bank didn't even bat an eyelid. Other times the banks were a bit funny about it. So it will depend on your personal circumstances, and it will depend on which bank you're actually banking with at the time. Over to you, Adam.
Y- Yep, and interest rates for
Yep,
that one.
exactly.
Do you have to cancel your Australian driving license? So again, ask yourself the question, would an Emirati have an Australian driver's license? I would think not. A lot of people like keeping it for, I guess,
Convenience.
efficiency point of views. Yeah, convenience point of views when you try and get, I don't know, a rental car in Europe or something, it's easier to get it through an Australian driver's license. But look, I'd prefer not.
Yeah, there's also a good point. If you actually read through the fine print, I had a Queensland license and I thought, oh, it's 50-50 whether I renew or not. Went through the fine print as part of the declaration you make when you're renewing that license is the fact that you're a resident of Queensland. So, and we all know how the ATO would love to grab hold of an official statement and sort of wave that in front of our face. So for me, I let mine expire personally. Okay, Adam, on to you. Is it B or you?
The doesn't matter. I can take
Yeah,
it. So
all yours.
following on from your answer on bank accounts, if I have significant savings in an Australian bank account, 1 mil plus, is it best to transfer to the UAE bank account if I'm going to be there 3+ years before moving back to Australia later on? Look, generally we don't like people or clients keeping a large sum of money in the Middle East, and it's just risk mitigation. We are exposed to different risks over here in terms of, not Australia, where Australia has good corporate governance, consumer protections. The banks are so big they can't fail. The question that I would have is from an ATO perspective, why is that $1 million sitting there? Like, what's the purpose of it sitting there? You could be using that for other things if it's offsetting a mortgage or, investment purposes, probably like more of a wealth accumulation conversation.
Well said, man. Question from John. Uh, After accounting increase UA living costs, do you actually save money? I'm a 50% taxpayer. The honest answer is it depends on your lifestyle. If you're at a brunch every weekend, if you're overseas every time we have a public holiday, then no. If you're traveling back to Australia once or twice a year, then no. If you live in comfortable accommodation, not flush, but comfortable accommodation, and depends whether you have kids or not, depends whether you have two incomes or one income. So I think you can personally, but you just got to not get drunk on the lifestyle. If you stick to that, then I think you'll be fine. Over to you, Adam.
Can you send money to your relative in Australia? How much and how frequently? So just clearing up this point. So Brett and I see it a lot. A lot of people, before they speak to us, transfer $9,999 back into Australia because they think that that's under the 10,000 limit where AUSTRAC doesn't have to report it. If someone makes a transfer of 4 lots of that, that looks more suspicious than just transferring $40,000. So don't be trying to I guess, get around that. You can send money back to your relatives. In Australia, people send money back to their family for them to live off. So it's really, your choice in that respect. There's no rules from this side.
Yeah, well said, mate. Okay, my turn. Isn't there a contrast between my declaration of non-resident of Australia and having my house in Australia still under my name? Just anonymous, I'll take you back to Adam's point. He said earlier, would an Emirati ... Would an Emirati invest in Australian property? Yes, they own a truckload of it. Doesn't mean they're a tax resident. As long as if that's your house, you rent it out to make it an investment, then that's fine. If you leave it vacant, then you're going to have problems. And that's what the ATO, especially under the new rules, is looking at from the accommodation test. So if you're treating this as an investment property, you put tenants in, you're claiming the income, you're claiming the tax deductions and paying the expenses like, council rates and those things, then it's not a problem at all. When it gets grey is when you look at the scenario of the, the purpose of that property. If it's investment, that's fine. If it's personal, then not fine at all. Okay, Adam, over to you, mate.
Yep. So can I keep my family holiday shack, which generates no income, as is not an investment? Is it not used often except by me from time to time for holidays? Yeah, for sure you can still keep your holiday shack, as you call it. Uh, just noting you may have to still lodge an Australian tax return, just declaring no income earned off the property, but just be careful of that. If the new rules come into place, that would technically count as an uninhabited property.
Good answer, mate. Okay, next one. Would it be more beneficial tax-wise to move mid-December 2025 or mid-January 2026? No difference, apart from a month's worth of tax you pay on your Australian income if you're working for that period. So it doesn't make any difference here. I think the thing that people find it difficult is to wrap their head around the whole no personal income tax, no tax returns here. So whether you arrive in December or January doesn't make a difference from a UAE point of view. On the Australian side, once again, if you're working for an extra month, it just means an extra month of tax you're paying to the government, but also an extra month of income.
Okay. Yeah. I think this is the same person who's posted quite a few messages here. They're asking about the new test and the day count of it. So the day count is actually still called the 180 day or 183 day test, and it is misleading because the points underneath say if you stay in Australia for over 45, 60 or 90, whatever they decide on, then you fall into the next factors. There's 4-factor tests. So it's still called the 180 day test, but the reason why they have that dot point underneath is because based off current rules, people were staying over 183 days across 2 financial years and still being non-residents of Australia. So that's why they've introduced that new point.
Okay, fantastic, mate. I think that covers off everything I can see there. So yeah, probably one of the most active quick Q&A sessions we've ever had. So thank you, folks, for bearing with us and getting through all that information. As you can see, it's a lot of information. So we want to make sure you guys and girls are as informed as much as possible. If you do have questions and like to organise a time to meet with any of the team regarding financial planning, tax returns, private rulings, mortgages, asset management, please reach out to us at atlaswealth.com. On the screen there, as you can see there, we've got the full suite of licenses. So the regulators keep us busy, but that's what keeps our advice honest. So thank you very much for your time once again. Thank you for your attendance, and we'll look forward to seeing you on another webinar.